My name's Hayley, and I work at the Saskatchewan Environmental Society doing policy work. So across Canada, people hear the word Saskatchewan and they automatically think flat and boring, at least that's my perception. But Saskatchewan is so much more than that. We're home to the beautiful Athabasca Lake that has the most northerly active sand dune formations in the entire world, and it's home to several species of plants that are found nowhere else in the world. We're also home to the Cumberland Delta, which is the largest inland freshwater delta in North America at 10,000 kilometers squared, and nationally significant wildlife area. And we're also home to many amazing species like the swift fox, a species that thrives on our native prairie. Unfortunately, our historical approach to the environment in Saskatchewan has threatened all of these things. The abandoned Gunner uranium mine on the north shore of Lake Athabasca has been leaching toxic chemicals into that lake for 50 years. Dams along the Saskatchewan River and other human impacts have been causing the Cumberland Delta to become increasingly arid and the wildlife populations there to decline. And the swift fox is unfortunately endangered in Saskatchewan now. Land conversion and habitat fragmentation has caused our native prairie to actually be the most endangered ecosystem in the world. And Saskatchewan only has 21% of its original native prairie remaining. So environmental issues like these don't exist in isolation. They're closely linked with those of health, of economy, of Indigenous settler relations, and of social justice. In Saskatchewan, our economy, of course, has been traditionally dependent on extractive resource industries that are now failing and are taking us from boom to bust. We're currently experiencing widespread concern about loss of government revenue and cuts to public services and job losses, and there's a sense of despair and fear. Unfortunately, environmental health is widely viewed as incompatible with economic security. The latter is seen as the priority, leading us to assume that a certain amount of environmental risk always has to be accepted. There is a reluctance to regulate and a failure to take the concept of sustainable development seriously. Our economy is also very emissions intensive, as I'm sure a lot of you know. And in many ways, climate change is an issue that dwarfs all others and certainly exacerbates them. It's really an existential threat that has the power to fundamentally change our way of life. And to me, it seems impossible to truly transform our province without considering transformation in the context of climate change. Our province is the highest per capita greenhouse gas emitter in Canada and per unit of GDP in Canada, and it's also one of the highest in the world. And we have no effective plan in place to either reduce our emissions or to prepare our province for dealing with an era of climate change. So we're also very vulnerable to climate change in Saskatchewan. While in the short term we may benefit from something like a longer growing season, we're going to be facing increasing risks from invasive species, from threats to human health and infrastructure, from floods and droughts, and from extreme weather events. And those changes are going to be affecting the most vulnerable among us the most, especially those who are depending on the land directly for a way of life, and the land itself, which we also don't think of as a vulnerable thing, but it is a vulnerable thing. So we're all a part of this picture. Our personal lives are very dependent on fossil fuels, and in Saskatchewan, it's almost impossible to do anything without fossil fuels, turning on a light or heating our houses, or even driving to the summit today. And we also have families who are dependent on fossil fuels and resource extraction. That's where they derive their livelihood from. And we all, of course, rely on resource revenues to fund important public services. So these are real concerns we need to address in any sort of transformational change in Saskatchewan. So overall, Saskatchewan seems to be experiencing a sense of paralysis, or in some cases active resistance to dealing with this problem. And there's really a lack of innovative and inspiring leadership in government and in commerce and education on this issue. So how do we transform this picture? Well, I'm not an expert, I don't have all the answers, but I hope to suggest a few, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts later as well. So a robust climate change strategy is the most important and the most urgent of the many environmental issues facing Saskatchewan. And because of what we need to do to address it, a proper climate change strategy will have implications for all of the other issues we are talking about today. First, we need to reduce emissions from our largest emitting sectors of oil and gas mining, electricity, transportation, and agriculture. And those four sectors together produce 92% of our provincial greenhouse gas emissions. From a policy perspective, it's easier to tackle emissions in some of those sectors relative to other sectors. So until now, carbon capture and storage technology has been the preferred strategy our government has pursued to address climate change. However, our investment into this technology fundamentally reinforces the status quo and is also proving increasingly risky, and it cannot be the way forward if we really want to transform the province on this issue. So instead, it would be wise to target the electricity sector as a sector to make a major emission reduction saves in. This would include planning for a complete coal phase-out by 2030 at the very latest, and aggressively pursuing renewable energy paired with energy efficiency. Saskatchewan has world-class solar and wind potential, and there's many entrepreneurs and business people who are just chomping at the bit, ready to get to work on those. And SaskPower should plan to significantly increase their planned renewable energy capacity by 2030. Rather than relying on natural gas to meet any additional energy demands. Saskatchewan should also look for sources of energy production that we haven't pursued, such as cogeneration in potash mines, or installing microturbines at productive wellheads to capture natural gas that would otherwise be vented, or importing additional hydropower from Manitoba. In fact, the federal government has recently announced that federal funding would be available for green infrastructure projects such as this, particularly interprovincial transmission lines that we could look into. And we should not forget demand-side management. Energy efficiency has been shown to be a great job creator for tradespeople, for technologists, for energy auditors. Low-cost programs that provide incentives for energy efficiency could include building code changes or retraining or education for architects and building tradespeople, and the upfronting of costs of energy retrofits by utilities that would be slowly paid back by a homeowner on their energy bill. So it is within our reach to truly transform our electricity sector if we choose to do so. And there are a variety of policy mechanisms the government could pursue to incentivize that transformation. One such policy is a feed-in tariff, which gives the producers of renewable energy a cost that reflects the true price of installation plus a modest profit. We could also pursue a carbon pricing scheme that uses revenue recycling to funnel back into our electricity grid, or we could pursue a set of flexible regulations, such as requiring SaskPower to produce 90% of their electricity from low carbon sources by 2030. In our oil and gas sector, a great opportunity for emission reduction is the adoption of venting flaring regulations in our oil field. Such as the proposed federal regulations to target a 45% reduction in methane emissions by 2025. Now, fugitive methane emissions are a huge source of emissions in Saskatchewan. They alone contribute 17%, or 13 million tons, to our annual greenhouse gas emissions. So regulations such as the proposed federal regulations would lead to 6 million ton reduction in those methane emissions by 2025, which is, by the way, 5 million tons more than the Boundary Dam Unit 3 equipped with carbon capture and storage that we spent $1.5 billion on. Transportation and agriculture are two sectors where it's a little bit more difficult to design public policies to target emission reductions. But we could use a variety of strategies to incentivize emission reductions in those sectors, such as encouraging a shift to rail transport, or working with municipalities to develop reliable and convenient public transit, or providing for the cost of, or incentivizing the purchase and use of energy-efficient vehicles in the province. Additional efforts really need to be put into working with our rural residents and farmers to identify what kind of ways they could be part of a climate strategy in the province. And also, additional efforts need to be put into how do we make our communities more resilient against the changes that climate change is going to bring. And in the event of a carbon price, some revenue that was collected could be directed into those efforts. At the same time, we must be enacting policies that are building our environmental resilience against the challenges posed by climate change. Our loss of biodiversity needs to be addressed at two levels. First, it requires that we increase the size and the number of ecologically significant landscapes that have protected status in Saskatchewan. It also requires that in those areas where we're allowing development, we have a proper environmental assessment and regulatory process in place to minimize environmental impact. So environmental assessment needs to be undertaken at both a regional cumulative level, so we can look at all of the impacts in a geographical area, as well as at a project-specific level, where we're really examining those impacts at the level of the project. And we also need stronger regulations around pipeline construction and operation, obviously, to avoid some of the recent episodes like the spill into the North Saskatchewan River and the spill just last week on Ocean Man First Nation lands. So among other things, pipeline construction and operation has to be under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Environment. It should be subject to an environmental impact assessment. Pipelines should be constructed with heavier walls and with the latest spill detection technology, and monitored regularly with improved emergency response and transparency in spill reporting. The health of Saskatchewan's water resources is also closely tied to climate change. Our water is currently adequate but vulnerable. Most of the people in the province rely on the South Saskatchewan River for their water supplies, for their personal water needs, and for our economic water needs. But climate change is projected to bring an overall decrease in water availability, and it's going to be changing the timing of peak flow, and change our patterns of precipitation. So Saskatchewan has tried to attempted to address some of these changes with the creation of the Water Security Agency, but much more needs to be done. For one thing, our province needs a drought contingency plan. If we return to a period of decade-long droughts, we need to know who's getting water. We need to be assured that those who need water will be getting water. And we also need to be building our water infrastructure to higher safety standards, so our water infrastructure is able to handle the significant variability that is projected to accompany climate change. So doing all of this is not just about reducing emissions or protecting our environment. It is about preparing our province to succeed in a post-fossil fuel world, where I imagine we might live with less, but we'll live better. And if I live to be 100 years old, if I'm that lucky, it will be 2091, so I will be very much alive to experience the consequences of our choices made in the next few years. Fortunately, I think we both have the way and the will to make transformational change a reality in our province. I also firmly believe that if we want different public policies, we have to change the way we create them. Top-down, expert-driven, and specialized approaches are characteristic of our traditional way of governing, but they're not engaging people in the way we need to be engaging people. When we create policies that way, we're making choices that are consistent with only one way of seeing the world and are not truly reflecting our diverse population. So moving beyond these traditional ways of making decisions will not mean determining the most likely future for Saskatchewan, but rather means taking a step back and asking, what future do we collectively desire? We need to start asking, where are we going, who is gaining and who is losing by which mechanisms of power, and is this development desirable, and what, if anything, should we do about it? So this will involve having frank discussions around values and power, and we cannot shy away from having those hard conversations that we need to undoubtedly have to transform our province. So I believe this process today is a really good first step in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's comments later. Thank you.